articulating where we're trying to go. When your constituents watch this television show, they understand your values, understand what you're trying to accomplish. I think this comes down to, he's talking about hope, they're saying nope. That's basically what this comes down to. And I think that we're going to have to push past that. But we've been at moments like this before. It seems like whenever America is challenged, there are some people who say, all right, I'm going to keep up with politics as usual. History reminds us that it's the people that try to find compromise, who try to move the ball forward. Those are the ones that get honored by history. And I think that's going to be the case here, too.
Yeah. How will the current deficit affect future taxpayers? I mean, people are now beginning to complain about this. I mean, bitterly.
Yeah.
Saying, look, wait a minute. You have this tremendous deficit, and you know what's going to happen. I mean, we have to pay for this, or our children and grandchildren. How do we respond to?
Well, first of all, a little history here. President Bush inherited a surplus. President Clinton inherited a big deficit. It's been Democrats that have been turning deficits into surpluses. The difference is, people say, well, it's going to be our grandkids that are going to pay for this. That's true. But our grandkids are not just going to get a bill. They're going to get new schools. They're going to get a power grid that's been upgraded. They're going to get wireless internet in the country. They're going to get a national health care system. Under the old administration, the only people who benefited were contractors in Iraq and millionaires. Those are the only people that benefited from those surpluses, from those deficits. So I think it's true. We are going to have to pay this money back, but at least we're going to have something to show for it. At least we're going to have things we've invested in so you can say, you know what, it's true. Our grandkids are going to inherit that deficit, but there's going to be now a roof put on the school down the block with the jobs that are being created. That's the difference here, and that's what we're trying to accomplish.
I noticed over the past few weeks, the Obama administration, have been bringing people in, experts, and having what they call summits, talking about health care, talking about contracting, talking about issues that, when people have just sort of been mumbling and grumbling about, but nobody's really taking them on. What do you think is going to happen with that? Because when you look at contracting, there's some serious problems. Yeah. And one of the examples that they gave was the fact that the Carnival Cruise received a contract in New Orleans with Katrina. And of course, nobody would go on the boat because they said water was their problem.
Yeah.
So therefore, they were not going to go back. And then, of course, they went into a long-term no-bid contract. And so he's saying that the contracting must be reviewed. And, of course, these summits they're dealing with. You think anything is going to come out of all of this?
Well, look, one of the things that we've seen in the early days of your chairmanship of the Government Reform and Oversight Committee is that there's a lot of looking back that we have to do. People say, government should be about looking forward, but I think we have to hold the Bush years accountable so that we learn from those mistakes. One of the things we saw that President Bush loved to do was not only contracts, but sole source, no bid contracts, almost always to connected companies. If you look how much we have funded in Iraq, trillions of dollars and a lot of it has been going in the form of no-bid contracts. That really has to stop. Just today, as we met, new program was put together dealing with appropriations, where we in Congress said, Nancy Pelosi, David Obey, who's the chairman of the Appropriations Committee, said that any allocation that we do that's for a for-profit outcome has to be put out to bid. And that's the way it should be. No exceptions. I mean, look, you may have an opportunity, you have to get to something very quickly, but even when we decide who the emergency contractor standing by should be, we have to make sure that is done by competitive bids. And it's so funny, and I don't know if you noticed the same thing, the same guys who come to the floor and bang the table about the free market seem to love these no-source bids where there's no competition at all.
Right.
And I think that has to change, and I want to commend you because your committee has already started to look at some of those things.
Right. Let me say raise this issue because we're talking about cutting out programs, and I must admit a lot of programs do not work, and that probably we need to look at that. But I'm always concerned about the fact that we're cutting out a program prematurely, and of course it might even have some future potential. How do we sort of guard against that kind of stuff?
Well, I think you got it exactly right. I remember I worked on Capitol Hill back when you were just a freshman member during the Reagan years. And one of the reasons why Ronald Reagan rose to power is he succeeded in pointing to many of the progressive programs you and I cared about and said, you know what, that's not working anymore. And he was right. We got a little bit soft. We didn't That's why I believe we should look at this in some degree, take pages from the way business gets done. You know, Jack Welch, the former chairman of GE, said in his book that what he would do is have every agency of his company make a list from the most effective to the least effective thing that was going on in that division. And then he'd say, tell me about the bottom 5% and why we should keep it. And he wouldn't automatically end it. He would say, if you think you can improve it, go ahead and do it. But we should feel that government should do that exact same thing. The problem is some of the very same people that talk about efficiency in government, what they really mean is they don't want to help a lot of people that I believe it's our obligation to try to help at. And they also, if we're going to get rid of programs that don't work, programs like Head Start that clearly do work, we have to dramatically increase their funding. Pre-K that we know works, dramatically increase the funding. Programs like food stamps and Social Security that keep people off of poverty, dramatically help. We should increase them accordingly.
Right. The other issue that I just want to just run past you again, credit, for some reason is frozen. The banks are not lending. People can't buy cars because they can't get them financed. Many of the companies that are involved in leasing cars don't lease them anymore. How do we break out of this? I mean, this is a mess.
Yeah. Well, I got to tell you, for one thing, it is clear that a lot of people who got credit shouldn't have. I don't know how many times I walk or drive around the neighborhood and I see 20-year-old kids in Cadillac Escalades with chrome rims, and I'm like, how does that kid be able to afford that car? And the reason is just about anyone was getting credit, whether or not they can afford to pay it back or not. But we have to make sure that the company that's doing everything right, the homeowner that is doing everything right, the new couple that wants to go out and buy a home in our community, that they're given the opportunity to do it. Right now, banks made a lot of mistakes in the past giving credit to people who should not have had it, and now they're preventing people who should have it from getting it. We have to try to break the logjam. So that when President Obama proposes letting people refinance, helping banks get them more money so that they can lend, we should encourage that. But I'll tell you something. I am frustrated that a lot of people that went out and got these loans and bought houses that, when I see someone who makes $30,000, $40,000 a year getting an $800,000 loan, I don't have a lot of sympathy for that guy. But I realize that he lives next door to someone and they live on the same block as someone who played by every rule. Those are the people that I think we have to protect.
Yeah. Let me move on to the deficit. Now, the Obama administration is saying by 2012, they're going to cut it in half. You think that's possible?
Look, I think we have to be adaptive to what kind of a world we live in. Every day we're learning about new challenges that we face. This is a time that we should be doing more government spending. This is a time we should be priming the pump. As a percentage of our gross domestic product, a percentage of our economy, we're much lower than we were, say, right after World War II. There are times that you need a muscular federal government doing some of these things. And if it gets us health care, if it costs us some money to do that, it's going to save us a lot of money in the private sector. If it means that we're educating our kids better so they're getting higher paying jobs, these are investments that we need to make. I think the deficit is important. We have to make sure that government's not borrowing all the money and there's none left for the private sector. And I want anything that the president, if the president wants to achieve deficit reduction, we should try to work with him to get it. But our first option has to be how we improve the economy, not how we pay down the deficit.
Yeah. What about energy? That's an issue that everybody's talking about now, and of course, a lot of time has been spent on that. And of course, the budget that we're going to pass has a lot of money in it to deal with energy over the next 10 years. What are your views on that? Do you think that we're stressing it too much?
Well, Ed, I think we've been whistling past the graveyard for a generation now. We're importing too much oil from countries who take the money that we're using and turn it around and use it for terrorism. We're consuming energy far beyond our ability to get it back in the form of fossil fuels. At the same time, we have technologies that are emerging that we should help, that will solve a lot of our energy problems. We see them, some that are being experimented now, some that are probably just on the drawing board of a classroom somewhere. So we have to do it for our economy, but we also have to do it for our national security. Every time you put a gas pump, you start a gas pump, you should think, all right, this is money that's going to Iran, this is money that's going to Saudi Arabia. This is money that's going to our worst enemies.